Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Sweet Tooth episode 6. So, we're getting close to the fairly end of this show, and really we are going to also get close to have Sweet Tooth get to Colorado. In this episode, we are to do a number of things because there is a number of things that they are trying to fill the gaps in for. We are to see what is going to happen with Amy and the hybrids in the zoo. We are to see where they are to head because they are forcibly to be headed elsewhere out of their zoo. We are to see where Aditya is going next on his, all of this is all transitioning all of these people to move where they had been to a different location now within this episode. That's the main theme of this episode. We have Aditya who is transitioning with General Abbott and to transition him to a location elsewhere. We're not sure exactly where that is. We have Gus, Bear, and Tommy who are all going and trying to catch the train that had been mentioned on last episode, and they are trying to transition onto a train to make it to Colorado. And so really that's what happens with this episode with Gus, Tommy, and Bear just trying to get onto a train to Colorado. So with that said, I think I have kind of covered every iteration of everything going on in this episode. There wasn't the animal army in this episode. There wasn't like a continuous of that. Like all of a sudden, like the animal army just came out of the woodwork anywhere. No, that didn't happen. Really, I do really enjoy this episode. It's kind of a transitional episode, so there isn't a lot overall going on. Probably the most interesting thing is going on with Aditya, where he eventually realized why he stopped practicing medicine, and I think the speech that he gives within this episode is kind of fairly interesting. Other than that, really this is a bulk of it just a transitional episode, so a lot of it probably just okay, there's a lot of boring moments in this episode where they're just kind of biding time because there is 2 more episodes left, I feel. Going into this, we still get a little bit of more backstory of Tommy, and man, you're really starting to invest in this character. And I'm just kind of wondering whether this is going to be the ticking time bomb of doom, because it seems like we are consistently getting little bits and pieces more of Tommy, and I wonder why. Basically because I guess we didn't get a clear 100% story of Tommy, and so now they kind of have to trickle it in here and there. Showcasing us flashbacks of football things that I guess Tommy was involved in. If anything, bizarrely, Tommy's knee didn't come into play or have a factor in this episode. So that was great. Other than that, yeah, I think that's all that was to be said about this episode. Yeah, it was just an okay episode. A lot of people probably didn't care about this review, just because it's this episode was just kind of a transition episode. Who cares? If anything, there's some episodes of Sweet Tooth that are going really well, and then there's some that are just completely and utterly dead, and this might be that one because it's a boatload of transitions. Or it might go really well, surprisingly. So with that said, let's go on to the double 5 time territory. Get to spoilers about this episode because, yeah, there isn't much to say, but this is a transition episode, so really it doesn't have like a ton of interesting things going on to it, so I can probably get this review done fairly quickly, luckily. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this episode. So, in the very beginning, like I had 4 minutes to talk about this show cryptically, just because, like, almost barely scratching the surface of 5 minutes, just because there isn't much going on in this episode. Like, I really had to I'm probably really having to stretch this review, because of how just there's not a lot going on, even though there is a couple stories. Still, it's just so. Let's go with Amy, then let's go with Aditya, because Aditya is like the very first thing I think that pops into this episode. Then we'll go to the Amy stuff, and then of course the now Bear, Tommy, and Gus adventure, as per usual, is saved for last. So let's go into the Aditya stuff first. So we are to continue from where the last episode left off, where we are to have the I want to call them like the yellow soldiers at this point. So the yellow soldiers are to go through and start fire extinguishing through Aditya's house, trying to save as much as possible, not knowing exactly where Dr. Bell's book is. So we have Dr. Bell's book in some kind of cupboard somewhere, and General immediately finds it, and he's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's all that I needed. But Ronnie and Aditya are trying to uh, increase their value to this general and mention, like, hey, man, like, this isn't all that you needed. The book is not enough. Like, we found that there were certain hybrid genes that isn't in that book that we need to have to be able to completely cure this whole thing. Because evidently they weren't going to deliver them a hybrid, and I guess that's what that note was in that box, in that container, that there was no hybrid present for them to test on. And so we had Aditya, who is BSing to the general, mentioning about some hybrid gene that they need to be able to cure this whole thing. Aditya and Ronnie doesn't know if that's going to actually work, but they're trying to come up with something to stall being killed off by these men and trying to increase their value. So we have the general telling both these family members, both Ronnie and Aditya, like, they're like, well, go ahead and pack. Aditya doesn't have any clue what he actually needs to pack for, so that's why he's not actually packing. But Ronnie is just kind of getting a bunch of stuff together just to like go like, oh, okay, like, are we going east? Are we going west? What should we bring? But so eventually we have we have Ronnie, who is starting to pack, and so we eventually have Ronnie and Aditya having this moment together where Aditya is to mention that he was the first one to get the first case of a person who had gotten the sick. He originally thought it was some kind of flu or cold or something, but this person continued to come back, and it got so bad that he just kind of felt helpless to help this person. And so eventually the more and more people started to come to Aditya, and the more he could not help them, the more helpless that he thought to save any of them. To where eventually he just kind of carried this feeling so powerful onto himself that he quit being a doctor, just because it's like every time someone is going to get this case, they are guaranteed to die. And so Aditya just found himself to be helpless against stop becoming a doctor. And so we have this very interesting moment between Ronnie and Aditya, and especially Aditya, where he's just kind of like he stopped being a doctor, that's when he stopped having that feeling of helplessness. But eventually, what has kind of gone on with Nancy and some of the stuff that's been popping up recently, like he's starting to feel helpless again, and so maybe he'll feel better at some point or another. We also had Aditya that is trying to find Scrabble pieces to be able to eventually have Ronnie and Aditya still have Scrabble, if nothing else. But eventually, all that they can retrieve is one piece, and Ronnie gives Aditya that while they are to go out um, and transition to wherever they're heading next. Uh, Really, other than that, I think that is a bulk of what happens with Aditya and Ronnie in this story. And we eventually have Aditya who mentions to one of the men, "Could you please let my horse go? Could you let him run free? If we can't actually have him with us, could you do something with the horse?" And so we have one guy mention that he let the horse free, and so we just see the horse running off into the sunset. So pushing on. So Amy, we are to showcase the very first time we have ever seen Amy. She is next to this radio holding a gun. And this episode leads up to that moment where she is holding a gun, sitting next to a radio. We have Amy and we have Wendy and we have Bobby who all notice the ribbons, and Wendy is mentioning well, what if we just take all the pink ribbons off? Will anybody notice? And Amy's like, well, yeah, I'm sure somebody would definitely notice that somebody took all those off, and they'll know someone is here. So we have Amy telling all of the hybrids they need to pack, they need to get out of here. And so we have every single one of the hybrids all pack up, and we actually start to see some of the other hybrids that we barely saw on any of the episodes. We're starting to barely see them in this sewer. And so they all go through this sewer, and they all start traveling through this sewer. And so Wendy is going to have to be the leader of all of these hybrids, because Amy is going to I guess, stall these yellow soldiers from getting to the hybrids. Amy, I guess, is thinking that eventually she's just going to wait it out for these men to come and hopefully take them out, and then maybe Amy can eventually go and retrieve the hybrids back to the zoo, and maybe she'll be fine. But I'm also assuming that Amy is probably going to have to eventually defend herself to the death for this zoo, because I guess this is her new home and she can't leave it. I'm wondering if the hybrids are going to mix it up and eventually find Gus and Tommy, and eventually just have Gus go and be with all the rest of his hybrid people. Eventually, I guess at Colorado, I'm assuming, or assessing, because we don't actually know where Amy actually is. Plus, from what I remember, Tommy had mentioned that Colorado actually is where this supposed reserve is. The reserve meaning where Amy was. So more than likely, I'm assuming or assessing, the hybrids are going to meet up with Gus and Tommy, and then they're going to go on together to eventually be this big, huge amount of hybrid slash Bear and Tommy. So let's go into the Tommy, Bear, and Gus thing. So when we meet these three people, they are all chasing after this train. So we have Gus make it, we have Bear make it, and we're having Tommy, who is struggling to get on this train, and I'm immediately like, is this where these people separate? Is this where we're going to lose Tommy in this story? But we just have Tommy just barely get a piece of this train to eventually get onto this train. And so we're like, yeah, like he made it. So we have all three of them going on in the train, and so we are starting to see that this train is of the last man. That there are some yellow army outfits on one of the doors, and eventually we have eventually Bear somewhere down the road noticing that. But before that happens, they all just are thinking like, yeah, I think we'll be fine. Like, if anything, I think we'll just be able to just kind of make it through here, and like no one will notice us, or we'll be able to maybe hide when someone is to come down the road. So of this train, meaning coming into the coming through the compartments, checking on things. So we have eventually both Bear and Gus playing I Spy, because what else could you do but just kind of just play the I Spy game, because they eventually see all kinds of zebras, giraffes, and eventually Gus sees a monkey that's on some sign that says zoo. And I'm like, so are they kind of foreshadowing that eventually, like, Gus is going to, like, that's why I'm assessing that Gus is going to end up with these hybrids, because I'm like, they've already, like, foreshadowed that the zoo is coming. So, like, I'm assuming that the hybrids are going to eventually meet up with Gus, Tommy, and Bear. Like, I think it's, like, inevitable at this point. So, pushing on. So, we eventually have somebody coming through the things of this train to double check on things. And eventually we have Tommy, who's like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to fight this guy. And so we have Tommy, who is just beating the crap out of this guy, and eventually this guy is to pause and tell Tommy, wait, whoa, TJ? And we have this guy who is named Jimmy know TJ, because it seems that both of them were football players for the same football team, and they were the best of friends, because TJ or Tommy used to block for Jimmy and made him look really good. So yeah, like, these guys are the best of friends, and Jimmy is not at all like angry or upset that Tommy is a hybrid with him. Everything is peaches and cream. So we eventually have Jimmy, who is to ask Tommy about, hey, whatever happened to your wife, Elise? Like, the last time I saw her, I knew she was pregnant. Like, did she still have her kid? And I'm like, oh my god. Tommy probably had a hybrid kid, and maybe that's the reason why Tommy is taking care of Gus, because maybe Tommy realized that his son was a hybrid, and so that's the reason why Tommy is helping out Gus, because Tommy is helping out the son, technically, that he never had. So I'm like, oh my god, this story is getting really intriguing. Because I'm assuming if Tommy's wife was having her kid while this whole thing was going on, then Tommy would have given birth, or Tommy's wife would have been given birth to a hybrid. And I'm like, oh my god, so that's the connection that Tommy is making to help out Gus, because that could have been his kid. so intriguing because really all Gus had was his father, and now that Gus's father is gone, this story is getting really interesting. So we have Tommy mention to Jimmy that, hey man, don't mention my wife. Like, don't mention that she was pregnant, man. Like, my wife and her my wife got sick and she died. And Jimmy's like, oh man, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. So evidently, yeah, like, so Tommy's wife died during this whole thing. And so, like, I'm really, like, so I can, like, I'm really trying to make a lot of connections here. I'm really trying to understand what all is going on in this story. So, anyways, we eventually have Gus who says that dog has gone missing. And Tommy mentions it's like, well, hey man, we can just replace it. And Gus is like, no, you don't get it. Like, that is the last remnants thing that Gus has of his biological father is that dog. And like that's the only thing that Gus could keep with him that will remind him of his father. And also it smelled like his father too. So Gus is to look all over the place for this dog and can't find it. And so eventually we have Bear, who is to realize that the yellow soldiers are making their way through this train, and eventually all these guys will be spotted together, and Gus is a hybrid, so they're in hot water anyways. So we have Tommy, who is to notice peeking through the door that he spots Dog in the exact same room that these yellow soldiers are in. So we have Tommy who sees some outfit of a yellow soldier, and so Tommy decides, well, hey, like, I'm gonna have to go out there and do something stupid. So Tommy is to go out there with a disguise of a yellow soldier, and to mention that to basically just grab Dog. And when somebody is to ask him, hey, what's going on? Tommy is to mention, like, well, hey, like, I just wanted to do, like, a background check because there was a gas leak in our oven. And so we have the yellow soldier who mentions, like, well, that's funny because all of our ovens are not gas, they're electric. And I'm like, oh, So Tommy is like, wahoo, wahoo. And the yellow soldier's like, yeah, I'm probably going to have to kill you right now. So we eventually have Tommy who bum rushes back into the room. And so they end up closing the door, and Tommy and Jimmy are holding onto the door while everyone is to figure out what the heck that they are doing. Because eventually we have Tommy who shows Gus that once they are to get over the big thing of water, that they are to make it to Colorado. And Gus is to mention, it's like, well, yeah, like, go Grove, here we come. Like, and so Jimmy eventually knows where Go Grove is. And evidently it was called something different now because they just call it Go Grove. And so we have Jimmy who mentions, like, I guess exactly where Go Grove is. And so we eventually just have Gus and Bear who just decide, dude, we're gonna have to jump. We're gonna have to jump off this train. That's what we're gonna have to do. And Tommy's like, well, hey, go, like, and eventually I'll be with you guys in a bit. And Gus is like, no, we have to go together. Like, we have to do this all together or we're not going to go. And so we have Jimmy that mentions to TJ, like, hey man, like, go ahead and go. Like, I will hold this door for as long as I can. It'll make up for how many numerous times that you made me look good in football. Because they show little flashes of football stuff here and there, um, but pushing on. So we have Jimmy hold the door for these people, and eventually, every single one of them all jump off. And then Jimmy ends up getting so tired that eventually the door opens, and all the yellow soldiers. Uh, Jimmy gets some pretty good hits, but then eventually he goes down and he ends up getting murdered on this train. So we eventually have Gus and Tommy and Bear eventually heading on to eventually see that there is a sign that calls that says Essex County, and they are to eventually see a road that is eventually going to lead them to a town that is hopefully going to get them to be able to hopefully survive and be in better shape than they were prior. So we'll see how this goes. I think I did cover everything within this review. If not, then there might have been something that slipped through the cracks here or there. But I kind of did probably cover this much more in order of the episode of which way it went than anything else. But with that said, I am going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.